Hello and welcome to Hessens County. I'm glad that you could join us again today here for another TTRPG Talk. This video series takes a look at tabletop role-playing games, related materials, world-building suggestions, and game design. Today's game is one that's been very long on the list of games to cover, and that is Artesia, Adventures of the Known World. Artesia, and keep in mind I might be saying that name incorrectly, but Artesia, Adventures in the Known World, was written and created by Mark Smylie and published by Arcadia Studios Press. This was back in 2005. Artesia was one of the first RPGs that I had ever been exposed to that was mainly the creative vision of a single person. And it also contained unique elements that have come to influence a number of my own creative choices when I started creating games later on. It also inspired one of my first major game hacks that I undertook, adapting the character creation system of this game for a Legends of the Five Rings campaign that a friend of mine wanted to run. In any case, let's go ahead and talk about the game. This TTRPG was built on the Fuzion RPG system. If you're not familiar with this, it is literally a fusion of the Interlock system used by Artesia Games for Cyberpunk 2020 and the 4th edition of the Hero system published by Hero Games, it was a generic evolution of its long iterated on superhero game Champions. Besides having a lot of similarities between the two systems, this game has also been compared to GURPS. Artesia also incorporates elements of another Artesia game system product, the Lifepath system. The Lifepath system was closely related to the Interlock system and was used in the Mechton games, the sort of Gundam-influenced games that Artesia created as well. Fuzion in Artesia has a relatively standard target number dice mechanic. Whenever your character is completing a test, you simply roll a d10 and then you add your character's characteristic score, that is set between 1 and 10, their score in a relevant skill, which is also normally between 1 and 10, any speciality that skill might have, and any other outside modifiers. To succeed, this total needs to be equal to or above a target number, which is set by the game's difficulty rating on an action between 10 and 30, which you can actually see in the chart right there. Rolling a 10 on a d10 results in an exploding die, although this game does not refer to it as that. If your final result is 10 or more points above that target number, then this is considered a critical success. But if the result is 0 or lower, once all of the modifiers are taken into account, then this creates what we would refer to as a critical failure, and there's actually a table of suggested fumbles that might occur to your character in that case. Now, the dice mechanic here does seem to be rather simple, but it does come along with very complicated character mechanics that we'll explain in just a moment. This is the Artesia character sheet, and as you will see, there is a lot of stuff going on here. Your character will have 15 of those characteristics that we mentioned previously. These are sorted into the 3 columns that collectively describe your character's physical, mental, and spiritual capabilities. The 3 groups also add together to create a body, mind, and spirit score that also doubles as your character's hit points in these 3 different areas. So your character could potentially die if their mind is heavily afflicted, their spirit is heavily afflicted, and not just like being physically injured. Your character will also have a very long list of skills. Discounting languages, there is a non-exhaustive list of 67 named skills in the book, many of which have specialities that can also modify the role. Language skills are also broken down into spoken languages and scripts, which include several different sets of alphabets or runes that are used to write the various languages in the known world. Some of the mini skills are also cap skills. These limit the application of other skills in certain roles and situations. For example, one of the cap skills is writing. Now, I will admit this is rather logical. After all, being an expert duelist is of somewhat limited utility in a cavalry battle if I can barely stay on my horse. However, it does add yet another layer of complication that needs to be tracked and considered whenever you're trying to decide what to roll. Finally, another thing that can apply are bindings and gifts, which can be acquired during either character creation or during play. Now, gifts are special abilities, blessings, and spiritual powers that your character can harness to positively influence events. This could be, again, during a character roll, or they could be used in other situations. Bindings, meanwhile, are physical, emotional, spiritual, psychological, or social complications that make certain actions more difficult. Some of these are always there, while others are normally dormant and then get triggered through either conscious choice on the part of the player or outside events that bring the binding to the fore. So a good example of a binding that is always there might be sick, right? If you're sick, if you have some sort of illness, then that's going to have a pretty negative effect on lots of different physical things that you might be doing. Tired might be another one. A dormant one, that an example that the book gives is grief. If a character that you are familiar with dies, then that might give you a grief binding, depending upon how strong your relationship was with that character. Initially, that grief binding might be there all the time until you kind of go through a mourning period or whatever. But once that mourning period is done, it goes dormant, unless something happens that, again, triggers that grief binding. So you might encounter something that very strongly reminds your character of this other character that had deceased, and again that brings up that grief again through the memory. Just when you thought we were done, throughout the book, like here on page 87, but also on page 174 and on page 210, there are a list of recommended modifiers that should also impact rolls that, depending upon what type of roll they are. So, for example, here on this table, if you're utilizing a social skill on someone with a different culture or social class, you might get a malice. There might be an effect from spiritual pollution whenever you're attempting to do a religious ritual, or if you're trying to do magic and you're too close to an urban area, since magic in this world generally pulls from nature. You might have, bonuses or negatives from by attacking from a certain elevation or in comparison to your target, or if you're fighting in the dark. Another modifier might come from your character doing an action for the very first time, or you having to utilize improvised equipment to complete it. In summary, the level of specificity that is present in the simulation that Artesia's rules may create could appeal to some who especially like that sort of really hardcore, covers all the edge cases simulation. However, in many others, it would create a level of paralysis, not only in making decisions, but also trying to decide like what skill or characteristic would apply to this and what modifiers do and don't, and also adding and subtracting all of these modifiers and skills and everything just complicates what started off as a rather simple math-based system. All of those complications, of course, are heightened even further, or augmented by the experience and character improvement system that is utilized in Artesia. Basically, there are two different ways that your character can be developed. And again, this is based off of that Lifepath system that we talked about previously from our Talsorian games. You can improve your character skills and characteristics by training, by which point I mean basically you spend the entire week just essentially training that skill in-game, and then you gain a training point that you can then use once you accumulate enough will improve your characteristics to the next level. So for example, if I want to improve my character strength, then I just have my character do stuff that helps improve their strength, like carry big blocks around for helping build a castle or something, or lifting weights, or stuff like that. Eventually, you will gain enough points in training, and again, once you train a certain point, if you have to go and do something else, then you come back and train some more, and then eventually you reach the point where you hit your next level. When you're practicing a skill, you just need to have enough training points to reach that next equal to the next rank. If you're trying to improve a characteristic like strength I just mentioned, then you need to have the next rank times 3. So that's a long time, as you can imagine. But another way that you can potentially do it is basically by just gaining experience through your different adventures of stuff. This is the complicated part, because you gain experience by doing certain things that are associated with certain Arcana cards, the major Arcana cards. If you do those things, then you get Arcana points, which are tracked separately per card. And you can only spend those points on certain things depending upon what you got it from. And unlike training points, Arcana points can be used to improve, to gain new gifts, or to remove bindings or lessen bindings, instead of just skills and characteristics. Although you can certainly use them for that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just explain this a little bit further by taking a look at 1 or 2 examples in the Arcana cards. There is going to be nudity. A lot of the art in this book actually does contain at least female nudity, sometimes male nudity. So that's just something you to keep in mind if you're going to be continuing this next section of the video around small children or in public or something. You might want to keep that in mind, just in case that's a problem. So as I mentioned, each of the Arcana cards is associated with a certain class of actions, essentially. And each of them has a table, just like the one that you see right there, that kind of gives you a big long list of things that you can gain these Arcana points for doing. So with the Magician, the first one over there, number 1, creating things is really important. So learning and casting magic that's not associated with religion. Or adding enchantments or enhancements to an object, learning how to do something in a new way. These are all discovering new things and naming them. These are all things that would get you Arcana points for the Magician. Then you can use those to potentially learn new skills, gain extra points into your new characteristics. Each one of these is associated with 3 characteristics from body, mind, and spirit. So, for example, the Magician, it's technique, imagination, and presence. You can also gain certain gifts. So, for example, I might be able to gain many tongues, which basically makes me a form of polyglot to a certain extent. Or otherworldly visage, which makes me gain an unusual appearance. You can use them to reduce certain bindings, like in this case, despair or grief, or also ennui. I'm not exactly sure what ennui is. And then also improving certain skills. So craft work, drawing, engineering, musicianship, storytelling, star lore, craft work, blacksmithing, so on and so forth. Again, each of these is different. So, for example, for the Great Priestess, a lot of this has to involve in religion, but also childbearing and also raising children. So you actually gain Arcana points for successfully raising a child to the age of 16. Or you gain points for having twins or giving birth just at all, right? In addition to building temples and stuff like that. So again, it just depends on what these particular Arcana cards are associated with. Here's another example, right? Death. Just seeing or handling corpses can get you Arcana points in death. Witnessing the death of individuals, whether that's family members, attending a cremation or a burial, some sort of service for the dead, that gives you Arcana points for death. Saving or freeing the spirit of an ancestor. Dying will also get you Arcana points for death, or returning from the underworld, whether in spirit or in body. These are all different things. Temperance. These are all different. All of these different ones have different things. Again, you can only use them to spend on certain things. The only exceptions are the world and the fool. The world gives you points for achieving certain things. So, for example, if you complete a quest, you get world points. If you Arcana points in the world, right? If you manage to get one of your skills to level 10, you get Arcana points in the world. If you have accumulated, like let's say 50 or even 100 points in a single Arcana path, like if you gained a whole lot of points in, let's say, the Empress, right, then you get points for the world too. These can be spent on pretty much anything, except for like reducing vanity bindings or certain gifts. There's limitations on what gifts you can use them for. The Fool, this is basically luck points. You can use them to add, you can spend points to add 1-to-1 for on your rolls if you need to increase or decrease your number. You can choose to decrease, but normally obviously you'd be increasing. And these are given for just like doing things that are good for the game, whether it's like great role playing, or you bring a prop, right? You bring food to share. You do something consistent with your character, even though there's a really good chance that you're gonna be harming your character in some way, like potentially dying or making other people laugh. Even all of these things would give you full points, which again you use essentially as luck points or bonus points that you can use on certain rolls. Again, this is the way the advancement system works. It can be very complicated to keep track of all of this, and also very complicated to keep track of which points you can spend on what. So while the basic idea of having this is good, I feel like this system is quite nice and could be very useful for certain things. The problem is there's too many categories, which unfortunately is supported in part by the fact that there are way too many different characteristics and skills that you could potentially be buying with these things. I know I've been saying a lot of negative things about this game after saying that this game has actually been a rather significant influence on certain aspects of my game creation process, and this is one of them. The Lifepath system that they utilize here. This is again like a lot of Lifepath systems that you might see in Traveler or in other systems. That we've talked like Cyberpunk, other systems that we've talked about on the channel. This system, which we will be featuring in future videos very soon, it's long, drawn out. It's essentially a mini game all of its own. And it really embraces a lot of the cultural and world building that Mark definitely brought into this game. So basically, you can see over here in this box, there's this big, long list of things that happen, right? And we are going to talk about this in much more specific detail, basically walk through this system in future videos, as I mentioned. So I'm not going to talk about too much more about it here, other than to say it is very in-depth, right? You set your birthplace determines your social level. Your social level determines your parents' social level. That in turn determines what tables you should be rolling on when determining your parents' basically their starting occupations. That influences your starting occupation. You get certain items and skills based on what culture you're from, what occupation you start at, what your parents' occupations are, what they train you in. Star signs can improve and reduce your starting characteristics, depending upon what time of year you were born in. Omens also can increase or decrease characteristics if you got certain types of omens or childhoods or your parents lineages, which is not actually here in this section. It's actually an appendix in the back of the book. Greatly influence like certain gifts you might start off with. It's nuts. It's big. It's complex. You might even find you're related to you're descended from a monster, or descended from like this world's version of Alexander the Great. It's all kinds of different things that are very, very interesting, very in depth, very world building. So many pages based on it. So basically, when you're done, your character will probably look something like this. So you can see that big long list. I'm blocking it, but you can see that big long list of skills. Um, you know, all of the life path events that we see over here from the ages of 16 to 21, history notes, all of these relations because of contacts or parents or all of that stuff. But anyway, yeah, so that is basically Artesia in a nutshell. There's a whole lot of other stuff in here that I could talk about that I'm just not going to, like the way that equipment works and all that stuff. It's honestly, it's on the complicated side. It's magic. There's a section on specifically on certain types of ritual magic. There's a divination, specifically enchantments, different sorts of runes and sigils that you might be able to use, alchemy. There's all kinds of stuff in here. The biggest and most important thing that Artesia really brings to the table, honestly, beyond all of this stuff, is the world. There is this whole world that is in Artesia that that has a whole lot of influence and power over the way that the game shapes the different cultures. And again, a lot of this does have influences from Europe, the Middle East, North Africa. There is a very strong influence from the sort of Greek world in particular, and both sort of the Greco, the early and middle sort of, the classical and later Greek periods. But there's also a lot of influence from like the Celtic parts of Europe, like France and Gaul, right, or England, Ireland. They all have little bits and pieces that really feel a lot really strongly connected to that, which creates a very interesting and complicated world. So again, that was Artesia Adventures in the Known World. This game does have obviously a lot of world building in it, but it also draws from elements that were originally established in a graphic novel series that had at least been started. I think only 3 of the volumes were actually released, but then there's also several different books and reference guides and things like that that have kind of come out since then that touch on different world building aspects associated with Artesia. In addition, that in 2022, there was Mark Smylie did release a novel called The Barrow, that also it takes place in this world, but a bit later in the history than all of the stuff that's really kind of happening here, I believe. I think there is, in theory, a second edition of this game that's in the works. That one actually goes under the name of Sword and Barrow, as opposed to this, because again, it's kind of based off of a slightly different time period. It's not 100% clear if and when this is going to be released, or how necessarily, like mechanically, it's related to this sort of Fuzion-based Artesia. I think it's probably safe to say that Fuzion is not going to be the engine for it. There are regular releases that appear on Mark Smylie's Patreon account. But from what I can, I have not paid for his access to his Patreon account, so I can't necessarily speak to specifically what all's there besides like titles and stuff, and things that have been released publicly on their website, on Mark's website. But a lot of it does seem to focus on, again, sort of more world building elements, either with intention of use in the old game, or to sort of develop like the novel that when he was writing it. But there does seem to be some elements of the new game that is being sort of shared and tested through the Patreon. Like there was mentions of a faction system and stuff like that that do not really appear in the original game. So I will be putting links to down below to again a website that connects to that, or also a couple of places where you can find the PDF of this game. Again, it came out in 2005. It is definitely not in print anymore. Hasn't been in print in a very long time. So, I mean, there might be possible to find print copies out there. A lot of them are going to be used or quite expensive. Thank you all for joining us again here today for our look at Artesia Adventures in the Gnome World. Keep an eye out for the video that we'll make kind of going through the character creation process for this game. And don't forget to rate your itch purchases. Have a good time. If you would like to show your support for this channel or for the Hessens County blog, in the description down below, you will find links to the channel coffee and also the itch store. Please feel free to take a look, and thank you for your support.